Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really powerful story, maybe one of the most important ever written in America, The Grapes of Wrath. Just imagine losing everything, not just to a natural disaster like a huge dust storm, but to a machine, something that literally pushes you off the land you've always called home. Well, this was the reality for so many American families back in the 1930s. So we're going to follow their journey. We'll look at how they lost their land. Then we'll travel with them on that long, hard road to California. And finally, we'll see what they actually found when they got there.
Okay, so to really get this, we've got to start at the very beginning. Let's talk about how it all fell apart for them, how they lost the only home they'd ever known.
So the first big problem was nature itself, a huge disaster. After years with no rain, the ground just turned to dust. And then these massive dust storms started. People called it the Dust Bowl. It was just awful. The wind literally blew their farms away, and with it all their hope. The land just couldn't grow anything anymore.
But you know, it wasn't just the weather. There was something else happening, something man-made. See, new machines, big tractors, could suddenly do the work of like a dozen families. The banks who owned the land, they saw a chance to make more money. So they started pushing people out to bring in these machines. It was all about efficiency, not people.
For the families, it felt like they were fighting some kind of monster. You know? A monster with no face. You can't argue with a bank. You can't tell it your family has lived on this land for generations. It doesn't care if your kids are starving. It's just a system, and all it understands is profit.
So, everything's gone. Their farms, their homes. What do you do? Well, there was this one little piece of hope floating around. People kept talking about California. Go west, they said. There's work there, there's fruit growing everywhere. It sounded like a paradise. And really, it was the only hope they had left.
And they held on to that promise for dear life. They packed up whatever they could, squeezed into their old, broken-down cars, and started heading west. This was the beginning of a very, very long road.
Just think about this journey. It was thousands of miles, mostly on the famous Highway 66. They started in Oklahoma, drove all the way through Texas, over the mountains in New Mexico, across the hot, dry desert in Arizona, until they finally reached the border of California.
You have to understand, this trip changed everything about who they were. They weren't farmers anymore. They were migrants. Their whole world shrank to the highway. The road was their home. Every day was just about survival, fixing the car, finding a little water, and somehow just keeping moving forward. But here's where something really incredible happened. Every night, all these families would pull over and create these little temporary towns. They made up their own rules as they went along. Not laws from a government, but simple rules based on being human. Things like helping each other, sharing what you have, and respecting your neighbors. It was a new kind of society, born right there on the side of the road.
So, after all that hardship, they made it. They finally crossed into California. But the dream they had been holding on to, well, it wasn't quite what they were going to find.
They were exhausted, sure, but they were still hopeful. They were ready to work hard. So, what was waiting for them in this supposed land of dreams?
Remember the dream? They were told California was this magical place where you could just reach out your hand and pick an orange from a tree. A land with so much food that nobody went hungry. That's the dream that pulled them across an entire country.
But the reality? It was a cold, hard slap in the face. There was no warm welcome. There weren't plenty of jobs. Instead, they found more struggle and people who made it very clear they were not wanted.
The people already living in California, they were scared. They looked at these new families and saw competition for jobs. They thought they were dirty and poor. So they called them names, like Okies, which was meant to be an insult. The families had traveled all that way just to be outsiders all over again.
Okay, so when you face all of that, the broken promises, the hate, something starts to change inside you. A different feeling starts to grow. And that feeling, that deep simmering anger, is where this book gets its title.
And you have to see just how big this was. We're talking about 300,000 people pouring into California. All of them homeless, all of them hungry, all of them looking for work. But there just weren't enough jobs to go around, not even close. It created a desperate situation for everyone.
And this is maybe the hardest part to understand. The fields were overflowing with food. They were oranges, peaches, cotton, everything. But while people were literally starving to death, the big farm owners would destroy the extra food. They'd burn it or dump it just to keep prices high.
Can you imagine that? Watching perfectly good food being destroyed while your children are hungry? Seeing mountains of oranges get sprayed with kerosene so nobody can eat them? When people saw that, something inside them just broke. That sadness turned into a deep, burning anger. And that's it. That's what the grapes of wrath means. It's that anger, that bitterness that grows inside people when they're treated so unfairly. It's like grapes on a vine. They get fuller and heavier over time, until finally they're ready to be picked. That anger is ready for something to happen. It's ready for change. But here's the most important part of the whole story. Even in the middle of all this darkness and suffering, you see this incredible human spirit. People who have absolutely nothing will still share their last piece of bread. They find their dignity not in what they own, but in how they help each other. It shows that no matter how bad things get, our humanity can survive.
So in the end, that's the big question the book leaves us with. It's not just a story about the past. It asks something really important. What happens when people are pushed to their absolute limit? What happens when good people face so much injustice? And that's a question that, honestly, is still incredibly relevant for us today.